Social media is a monster. It can be such a beautiful thing that spreads awareness, acceptance, education. It can do all these things. It has this incredible power to create so much goodness, but I think it's human nature to create a lot of negativity.
Welcome to Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan. I'm Dr. Dan. This show is about making the world a more loving, accepting, and compassionate place, one parent, one person, and one child at a time. The key to raising healthy and engaged kids is for parents to seek the same in their own lives while striving to be the best versions of themselves each day. No matter who you are or where you came from, with increased awareness, you can be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint for your children, your family, and all those you care about while living your own life to the fullest. Today's show is adoption, foster parenting, special needs, autism, and LGBTQIA, and much, much more with Eeka McLeod. Eeka's journey to building her family began when she made the decision to pursue her dream of adopting a child. After becoming a licensed foster parent while in graduate school, she started welcoming children into her home. Throughout her time fostering, Eeka cared for 18 children and eventually adopted 3 with disabilities, Eli, Evan, and Ella. The self-described family of misfits has made a name for themselves on social media during the pandemic with unapologetically real, hilarious content that showcases the triumphs and challenges of their daily life. Their devoted fan base includes 150 million likes, 2.7 million followers on TikTok, and over 117,000 followers on Instagram, as well as over 230 million views, 230 million views, and over 305,000 subscribers on YouTube. Eeka's passionate about using the family's platform to advocate for acceptance for the LGBTQ plus community and people with disabilities. 6-year-old Evan, who is queer, has become a social media star in her own right thanks to her love of wearing long dresses and careful hairstyles. Her story has garnered coverage from well-known media outlets, including The Today Show, CBS News, and Out Magazine, to name a few. Also, Eeka has earned 2 master's degrees, one in professional counseling, as well as being a marriage and family therapist. Now, doing more things in life, she is a like-minded kindred spirit. Eeka, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, lots to talk about. And we're, going to be talking so much about your family now and your platform and what you're teaching all of us, millions of us. I'd like to start with, can you tell us a little bit about your own family that went into you, creating this whole family? A little bit about your upbringing.
My upbringing, I have one sibling. I grew up in San Jose, California. I grew up in California. We live here now in Southern California. We love it. I don't even know what to say other than my upbringing was very up and down.
Mm-hmm.
So I did have loving parents. My dad, who raised me, I think he played a pivotal role, was not my biological father. Mm-hmm. And I think he was the first person to teach me that, family is more than just DNA.
Yeah.
And actually, Evan and Eli both carry his name as their middle names. So, it was the way he passed away when I was 20 years old. So I grew up in San Jose, California. Originally, when I was really young, my biological father was an addict. My mom wound up leaving him. Things were really rough. We were, I think we were poverty stricken on a very deep level. My mom met my dad, they got married, and we had about 10 years of a really good life. And then their marriage disintegrated, and it was kind of like back to this struggle. And then my dad died shortly after that. So my upbringing is something, like I said, it's just kind of up and down. It's all over the place. I think a lot of people have it where it's just really rough, and a lot of people have it where it's just really great. And mine is just, I don't even know what to say about my upbringing. I do think that a lot of things I learned growing up have instilled a lot of great qualities in me. I
Yeah.
think survival, the survival skills at the very least, knowing how to survive even with nothing would be something that really stands out. And I would say my mom probably taught me that.
Well, thank you for sharing that because, this show is not only about um, the footprints we're trying to leave on our own kids, but most importantly, the footprints that were left on us and what do we do with that with the families that we create and how do we go out in the world? And you've created this amazing family and you've also cared for many others along the way to forming your family. Was this something like when did you start to realize you wanted to create this family of your own?
Oh gosh, I always knew that I would adopt children. And I mean, I look at myself as a queer individual, and there's so many signs that were like in my past that I don't know how nobody called it out, or maybe people were just too polite to call it out. Um, but as a kid, like I never played marriage, I didn't play pregnancy, which I think a lot of little girls do. I played adoption. And like I whenever I do interviews and stuff, I always tell people, like it cracks them up. This was, of course, you got to realize this was like the 80s. Okay. It was just different times. I used to play wagon trail. So I'd get like two chairs and I'd set two in front, two in back. And I'd have like my jump rope, which was like, to do the horses with. And then my Cabbage Patch dolls would be along the way and these orphan children and I'd adopt them. And, we'd live under the wagon during the rain. It was very Little House on the Prairie. It was
Oh yeah, totally. I relate. I relate.
Yeah. So I've known, I would say I'm a very early age, as young as 5 or 6, that I knew I would adopt. I knew for me, it was really never in the cards to have biological children. Not that I can't. It's just something I've never wanted to do in that way. I think women are very pressured in our society. Like, what is wrong with you? How do you not want to have one of your own? That kind of talk and stuff like that. And I do think, funny enough, people really assume like her biological clock is going to start ticking. And I'm rounding the corner over to 42 now that it's July. I'm a January baby. So I'm 41 and that clock, I think that some people are just called to do things. And this was always my calling. That clock has never ticked.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, at my age, it's not going to tick for much. Nothing's ticking much longer, So, yeah, I've never felt that need, but it was one of those things. I always knew it. As I got older, I remember telling my parents, like, I didn't want to birth children.
Yeah.
Everybody always kind of gives you the same response when you're a female, like, oh, you're going to change your mind. Here we are all these years later. And then when I was, I think 13 or 14, I met a family. Their two daughters were good friends of mine. Back in my much younger, thinner days when things didn't hurt. Um, I was a competitive cheerleader and so were they. And so I would hang out with them and their parents were actually foster parents. So they had 5 biological kids and they would foster. And so when I'd go to their house, this was like, it was the coolest thing ever. It was all these kids. I really liked that the parents were more relaxed because with so many kids, you just cannot, my parents were even though they were very loving, very strict, we had a very regimented household.
Yeah.
And it was so different. And I was just like, this is how I'm going to do it. And I'm still friends with the family. Like in fact, I officiated one of their marriages years ago.
Nice.
Yeah, I know life is very weird. And then, I was in graduate school. I finished my undergrad degree and then I was starting graduate school and I was like, I really want to, but no, now's not the time. And to this day, I just tell people like, I heard a voice say no now. And then
Wow.
the rest is
Wow.
history. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Yes. Graduate school and fostering, right? Like each on its
Yeah.
own is a huge endeavor and
Yeah.
you must have a lot of capacity.
I'm nuts. I am always been that kind of person. It's funny because people say that and I think the idea of you can't just doesn't sit right with me. It never has. I've always marched to the beat of my own drummer. And I take a lot of flack for that. I've always taken a lot of flack for that, especially as a female. So it was, I mean, obviously home doing schoolwork most days. So it was nice to at least be there as opposed to doing an outside job. I mean, most foster parents, a lot of them work 9 to 5s. Maybe one doesn't or whatever if you're in a lucky situation, but most of them do. And so I was lucky enough that I could schedule things, I mean, if I had to write a paper and I was up at midnight or 1 in the morning, I was at least able to have that. I felt like it was very much a luxury. And so I was able to kind of make it work and just be really flexible. So it was the hardest though when I had one time, and I always said this out as a foster parent, I'll never do that again. I took 2 preemies back to back. It was like having twins, and it was
wow
3 months of just zero sleep. And I was just like, I may have bit off more than I could chew in that moment, but
yeah. Just in case you wanted to have a couple young infants, you're like, I'm not sure. Yeah.
One at a time. Like if you do it one at a time.
Yeah.
My hat's off to parents of multiples. It's exhausting.
What did you going into foster parenting, becoming a licensed foster parent? What did you expect that happened, and then what for people to be eyes open about who are pursuing this, who are on this path, pursuing this path, to be like, what are the unexpecteds?
I always ask people that, like even when I talk to people now, what is something that you wish you would have known? Like if I was interviewing for a job or doing something else, what is something you wish you would have known about this job before you started? And it's kind of the same thing. I would say most people go into foster parenting with this, golly gosh, like I'm going to go and I'm just going to change lives, y'all. We're just going to do all the things for the children. And that's good. I think we all go into it very naive and very gung ho. And that's just not what it looks like once you're on the inside. Number one, and I'm always honest about my experience as a foster parent. I did it for like 5 or 6 years. My license was open. I fostered 18 children in that time. Would I ever do it again? No, absolutely not. When I tore up my license, it was the best feeling ever. The system owns you at that point. And there is no freedom. You are constantly, number one, foster parents just right out the gate are treated like shit. I'm just going to say it. We're going to call it what it is. They really are. You have to realize you are the lowest of the low in that system, in the ecosystem that is the foster care system. Foster parents, there's like dirt, then there's the garbage that sits below the dirt, and then there's how they treat the foster parents right below that.
Okay, that sounds really messed up.
It is. And foster parents have zero rights. And a lot of it's put up and shut up. You are blackballed if you try to speak up or try to help. And, I was already, because I knew the family, trained going in, like you can't even say anything. You can't. And the hard part is you're raising these children.
Yeah.
You can't help but grow attached. And all of my kids, other than mine that stayed, left. And I was really good with the goodbyes. That wasn't super hard for me. I was built to do something like that. But the mistreatment by social workers, judges, attorneys, all the people involved in the system who are themselves overloaded, overworked, exhausted, extremely underpaid, well, primarily the social workers.
Yeah.
Everybody's at that point where they just don't care. They don't want to hear it. Just make it work. And as a foster parent, that's the hard part. These people clock out at 5 o'clock. You do not.
Right.
So it's a very, I always tell people, and some states and counties have regulated foster parenting as a job and some have not. But however you want to view it, it's very personal. This child, these children are in your home, sometimes alongside your own children, whether those children are biological or adopted. So it's a very, very personal thing. So personally, would I ever foster again? Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
So this experience led you towards adoption?
Yes, fostering is, I knew I would foster to adopt.
Oh, you did. You went into it knowing you were going to
eventually,
make permanent home.
Yeah, if for the children who couldn't go back, then the McLeod home would be a permanent home. That was kind of the idea. But yes, it was a very rough journey. I always tell people I walked through fire for my children, and that's how it felt.
And you still do.
Every day. Every day.
Every day. as you take a sip of your good-looking drink, I keep wanting to comment
That's
on your
my my first
fingernails.
caffeinated drink of the 3 I will have to drink today.
I see beautiful pride nails. I just want to shout
Oh,
it out.
yeah.
Pride Month. You've got the pride nails on.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love them.
So your famous family. As you were building your famous family, who knew you would have a famous family? Please share the adoption process as well, because that's not an easy one from my understanding as well.
That's hard to explain only because it depends on if you're adopting like private or through foster care, but I'll come at it from my experience of through the foster care system. Um, for these kids, if you decide to do foster to adopt, then you're fostering and adopting. Parents need to know that you can also just do it to adopt a child through foster care. I think a lot of parents don't know that and they get kind of bamboozled into thinking they have to foster. No, you can be on a wait list for a child to just straight adopt a child that would be available and all that stuff. So just so people know, you run the gamut of a case. Again, the length of a case varies. Typically here in California, I'd say it's about 18 months. In Texas, where I adopted 2 of my kids, it's about a year. You run the gamut of a case, and it's crazy to me how it works. There's a hearing every 3 months that lasts about 5 minutes. This is people's lives, children and the bio parents. Like, it's crazy to me. But they're so overloaded. So once it comes to the end, depending on, and obviously my kids' cases, parental rights, the departments decided to move forward with terminating parental rights for XYZ reasons. Once that PTR takes place, or TPR, termination of parental rights, that hearing takes place, then you're moved into the adoptions unit. And again, those units are extremely backed up. I've heard of families waiting a year to adopt they've already run the case. That was already a year. Now they're a year later just sitting in the adoptions unit because there's not enough workers back there. Fortunately, I didn't have that experience. Once termination of parental rights took place for all 3 of my kids, adoption hearings were set within about, I want to say, 2 months. And then, you're still always sweating bullets because it's just kind of like, sadly, the department owns your children, for lack of a better term. You're scared. It's a horrifying experience. It's very nerve-wracking. It's very, very emotionally challenging. And once you go to that hearing, it's, they do the song and dance and the judge is smiling and everything like that. And it's so funny to me. It was very, very backwards. I'm like, we've been tortured. You've tortured your parents throughout this process. And then you get to this point of like, we're so happy you're here. I was like, it doesn't seem like that, y'all.
Right.
And then the judge hits that gavel and it's wild. It's over. All this, the emotional trauma, the fear, everything that went into it for, at that point, probably 14, 15 months, it's over that quickly. And it's really cool because you go over and, they already know the name that you're changing your child's name to legally and all the things. And so it's after the adoptions, what's really cool is you kind of get those things trickling in. Like, the next cool thing after the adoption's finalized and they give you your adoption papers like on the spot. Like, this is your child, here is your proof. And then, a month or 2 later, all of a sudden the birth certificate comes in the mail and there it is. There's your name with their adoptive name.
Yeah.
And you're on that birth certificate. It's amazing. That's the cool part.
I can only imagine. It must be surreal when you get to that point and they're actually yours, all yours. No one else can tell you what to do. Yeah.
I've broken down. Getting those birth certificates, it's just like, it's like this big exhale. And even to this day, I mean, I just sent out her birthday invitations for her birthday party in about 3 weeks. I'm really excited. She turns 5 and she's my youngest. And even now, with my youngest being 5, when I have to get their birth certificates out for something like for school and I see them, those still make me smile. They still make me feel good.
So how did you go from just regular private family of misfits to famous family of misfits? Like, what was there a and I use that term lovingly, and your term, not my term, right, everyone? I've seen the videos. I've seen Disneyland. We'll talk about the old gays. I've seen the princesses. I mean, it's just magic. Like that part seems magic to me.
Well, what you see on social media looks like magic, but trust me when I say like the pitfalls of being on social media, they sometimes start to outweigh the good things.
Mm-hmm.
So keeping your head on straight with that is really important. I went public at the urging of a friend who was just like, you've got to put yourselves out there. Like people have got to hear your story and see your lives. And I was just like, nobody gives a hoot about us. I really didn't think so. And honestly, she told it to me for like probably 6, 7, 8 months. And finally I did go public on Instagram and nothing happened. Like, and we just kept living our lives. TikTok was very unintentional. I had a different friend who's like, you got to get on this app. It's so funny. And this was before COVID, before the lockdown, before the pandemic. Those were different times. And I got on, I want to say like December of 2019. And like anybody else at that time, I would stay up till 3 a.m. just laughing at most hilarious videos. I didn't post till January 2020. And I didn't post a lot. I didn't really understand the app. I posted like 4 or 5 times, and it was that last video. It went viral, like February 11th. I'll never forget that date because it was just like so shocking. It was kind of like wildfire from there. TikTok was very unintentional for us. It was not like I went on there expecting anything. I did not know how that app worked. And even for all the negative side of it, we have made some really great friends. So we're really thankful for that.
What is the draw, do you think? What is it that from you hear from your fans, your followers, what is it that speaks to them? So
The diversity. I think when you see someone who looks like you and you've grown up your whole life with somebody who never looked like you. We have good friends, Molly Gray and Jecca Jane, and they're married. Molly was on Teen Beach Movie. She's one of the stars of that on Disney Channel, and she was also like one of the top 5 finalists, I think, in her season of So You Think You Can Dance. I mean, she's incredible. And Jecca is her husband, and Jecca is trans, female to male. And I just share our lives. It's interesting how people blow things up more or want to assume things. But one thing that always stood out to me is Molly told me once, she goes, you know what Jecca told me? And Jecca wasn't even there. I think he was somewhere else in the house. And I was like, what? That he had said, if he had just had an Evan, if he had, when he was young, seen an Evan, how different his life would be in the processing of where he's at, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. He didn't have an Evan. He didn't have when he was a child, he didn't have a kid like Evan, happily living their lives, thriving with a supportive, loving family. And, Jecca wondered, I guess, like, how different, where would I be if I had an Evan? So that really stood out to me. And that was somebody that we're close with. So I guess to kind of sum it up, that's what stands out to me for that.
If you're comfortable saying, you've alluded to a few times, I talked about the magic I see with the TikTok and all these amazing numbers. You also talk about the difficulty. Would you like to share the difficulty of also being in this position in social media?
I mean, social media is a monster. It can be such a beautiful thing that spreads awareness, acceptance, education. It can do all these things. It has this incredible power to create so much goodness, but I think it's human nature to create a lot of negativity. I think, and you as a psychologist knows that as well as I do. When we hear one critical piece of information about ourselves, how many positive statements it takes just to overwrite that. We as humans are just wired to be, I think, very untrusting, very, for lack of a better term, just very negative. And that can come from so many places and so much trauma. But when you put so many people out there who can sit behind the keyboard and now have this freedom of saying things where they think they're not going to get caught, but then you have people out there when they do something really bad, now find out where they're working or where school they go to. You think they'd learn, but the downfalls of social media, I mean, people always are going to make allegations, accuse you of being someone you're not, accuse you. I mean, I think that the biggest one is I force Evan to wear dresses. And I'm like, right. One, have you ever met a child? Two, have you ever met a child with autism? There is no forcing Evan to do anything. If I could force my kids to do something, it would to be behave and listen. And they
Right.
don't do that. When I
Right.
tell you they don't do that, trust me.
Yeah.
I have multiple sitters in my home. One of them lives with us now, but sitters have been in my home multiple days a week, a housekeeper, like the kids, of course, have been in school. It's summer break right now, all these things. There are so many people in their lives who see, like, especially when we're talking about Evan, who Evan is. But somehow people think like there's just this huge conspiracy, like this ring of everybody,
Mhm.
forcing this on her. And it makes me sad. And it
Mhm.
only feeds into what they're doing is by doing that is feeding more homophobia and transphobia out
Mhm.
there onto these platforms. They're
Mhm.
not actually saying I'm concerned for this child because they know there's so many people in their lives. But yeah, that's what they're doing is feeding that. So that's really the downside. You look at people trying to manipulate your life, your family, your message, and it's ugly. It's really ugly.
It can get really ugly, and
Yeah,
there's just, whatever term we want to use, there's so many haters. It's like with
yeah,
all the goodness, there's always the haters. There's always the people who are going to use the platform to just for negativity and for
yeah,
hate. And so
yeah.
I hear that. I totally understand that, and I can also understand at some points why you might feel like, gosh, is this worth it? At some of the darker moments.
Yeah, it's a labor of love. Social
Hmm.
media is a lot of work. I think I hear young kids, like, now when you ask kids what they wanna be when they grow
Exactly.
up, like, right? When we were kids, we
Yeah.
were like, nurses,
Yeah.
teachers, like, I don't know,
Yeah.
these things, and now kids are like, "Influencer, I wanna be
Right.
on TikTok," and I'm just like, it's so surreal because we fell into this. Again, we fell
Right.
into this. I had no idea this is where we would be. And it's work for those people who think I think people think it's easy. I work 7 days a week. I am on 7 days a week. And the trick is when you have a family account, because that's right now the big trending thing is to say anybody who posts their children on social media is exploiting their child. Oh, there's pedophiles out there. Honey, the pedophiles are in your kids' schools. They are your kids' coaches. They are your neighbors. They are your kids' friends' parents. Um, so I think people forget about that, but that's really kind of what's coming up a lot now. And I do have to find that boundary, that line. I never want this to feel like work for my kids. The work falls on me. So much of our content is very organic, or it's just I'm filming one of them at gymnastics or dance or doing something silly. And then I create something with that. Or, even that one you talk about with the old gays. We had that planned. Evan was super excited. She's got her dress on. But you don't see, they did some TikToks together at the end, and Evan loves doing TikToks. But what you see filmed in that's organic content. It's just them engaging
Hmm.
and me standing back, and that's it.
Yeah.
So it's really a lot of that, and it's finding that balance. It's finding like what don't we share? There's a lot. I would say it's not even a toe dip that you're seeing of our lives, the challenges that we face as a family, because I know people won't understand the challenges that we face.
Hmm. Is
So
is is that a bind when there are those really tough moments? And I was thinking about the idea of exploiting, and you with your first of all kids melt down. We know kids with special need and autism have more triggers and more
we
reason.
know that.
Yeah,
We know
we know. Right, I'm
that.
saying we
We know
know.
that.
So part of the realness of your life is also that difficulty. And so I imagine you have to really think how much to
I
show.
don't show that.
Mhm.
I cannot show that. Beyond the fact that that would feel like exploitation, I don't think that my kids would want me, like, if it's a silly little fit or something and they're just being funny, but when
Mhm.
it's an actual, we talk about those outbursts, the ones as well as I know what those look like,
Yeah.
um, and how serious those can get, that's never shared.
Mhm.
Why? For many reasons, and I wish I could on some level, but there is that line as a parent for my kids
Right.
that for me is a very big line. And that's number one. And number two, I think that kind of in growing on social media and learning stuff, I realized that in sharing that, people don't want to be educated. They want to draw their own conclusions of what leads to something like that. And ultimately, what happens is the failure is always placed back on the mother. If there's two parents involved, it's still always placed back on the mother. But somehow I'm supposed to be shooting rainbows, cupcakes, and unicorns out of my ass and magically supposed to be able to make everything that my kids do perfect and angelic and all that. And that's not how it works for children with disabilities. It just doesn't work that way. They're going to do what they're going to do when they want to do it. And I'm just like trying to corral. I'm just like, whoa, but let's make sure we're safe while we're doing it. Okay.
Right.
So that's really what it is.
I wanted to ask you a question about pronouns because I know everything changes in real time, and many of your followers know your kids and Evan, but there are some who are listening this for the first time and don't. So Evan, who has described, I was going to say at first himself as a girl boy,
yeah.
and was going you were using the pronouns he, and then I got the updated bio, and there's she referred to. So I wanted to make sure that I am up to date on.
You are. She, her.
Yes.
She came out as a girl. It's funny because everybody's like, oh my God, I was totally waiting for this. And I was like, maybe it sounds crazy, but I wasn't. I felt like girl boy was a very accurate term for Evan. And then one day Evan was in tutoring and I had Eli and it was really hot. So me and Eli just waited in the car and we can look right in. We're at the door. And Evan came out from her tutoring and gets in the car. And I usually speak because Eli can't talk. So I usually speak. I want the kids to learn to engage with Eli. So I'm like, oh, Eli wanted to know this. Like, so I talk like that. And they'll talk back to him, which is so cute. I was like, Eli wanted to know where brother was at or what brother was doing or something like that. And Evan had just gotten in the car. She was still standing. She was going to sit down. We were still parked. And she whipped, I was in the front seat, of course, driver's seat. She whipped her head around quick, fast, and in a hurry. And I'll never forget this. She was like, I sister. I sister. And I was like, so I approach those things very carefully because I know that miscommunication can happen between anybody as an ex-therapist. I know that.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay. I'll say, I want to clarify. Can I ask you a question? Like I always ask her permission to ask her. So you're saying Evan is sister, Eli is brother, Ella is sister, like clarifying those things. Okay. And then once she confirms, like, by asking her questions, well, do you want to, and I have to give her examples because I can't just say like he, him, she, her. And Evan's like, whoa, I have to say, how when I talk about Ella, I say she likes to go to the park. That's her toy. When I talk about Evan, do I say he likes to go to the park? That's his toy, or she likes to go to the park? That's her toy. And Evan's like, no, she, and so, and Evan's very verbal. She never stops talking. So it was a really, humbling experience as a parent because I thought, well, I know that this is Evan. And I really just expected Evan to stay as the girl boy and we'll see where it goes when she's a little older. So it was a big surprise to me. It was, but she is using she, her pronouns. And she's sister, not brother, and daughter, not son.
Like growth and development it's lifelong, and we don't know when we're going to keep with our awarenesses. Evan's journey is so typical, and when I say typical, in the sense of typical, like we don't know what it is. We don't know when people are going to come to new awarenesses about themselves. And where I'm going with this is your awareness, because I loved your YouTube video that you did last year, which is I put the A in LGBTQIA, and how you talk about your becoming aware in real time of your sexuality. Like, who knew? Like you said, someone could have told me some of these stuff. Like we don't stop growing and learning.
And even since that year, from posting that video, I have come to my awareness is even more heightened now about my own sexuality. And like I was joking earlier in this podcast, I was like, there were signs, so many signs. So I actually, I talk about being queer, definitely asexual. I haven't talked any more about it. And it's funny because a lot of my friends are like, why don't you come out? And I'm like, I really can't. primarily because the people who are negative, the people who want to create this hostile environment surrounding, and being very homophobic and transphobic, really telling my story, I know how they would try to twist that message, and it would become Evan's journey would become disingenuous, and Evan is my focus. So I actually don't really go any further in depth than what you saw in that video. But yeah, there are more realizations that I've come to, and I'm just like,
yeah,
there's no age limit. And I just saw this. I think it was the Today Show just shared an article. I don't know if you saw it the other day or last week. It was a woman, I want to say she's 50, and she just came out as gay, and she was married for like 30 years, something wild. And she's like, I should have known, like, apparently gay women like buying Subarus. Like, and she's in front of her Subaru. I was dying. But I loved her message of it's never too late. Those realizations, I think people put the LGBTQIA community in such a box. The first thing is just like, well, Evan can't. First of all, they confuse gender identity and sexuality.
Right.
They do not somehow, no matter how much people say it, they still believe the two are the exact same thing. And I'm like, Google exists, people. Try it. It's when I was young, the encyclopedias were awesome. I can get you one of those if that helps.
Yeah.
So that's really hard. So they're just like, there's no way, Evan can know this and that. I was like, I sure as hell knew what I wanted. Evan's about to be 7 years old here in a month. I'm like, I remember I can have memories back to when I was like 2, 3, 4, very feisty. I knew what I wanted. And then it's just like, they shouldn't be allowed to do this or make that decision till they're 18. So you are cisgendered, heterosexual. You didn't make that decision till you were 18? Because I recall you going probably to all your school dances with a date, homie. So they should have less rights. We should have less rights.
Yeah.
How does that work? Or so it's like they want to put these age stipulations, and I think for a lot of people coming out older, like myself, there's a lot of embarrassment and shame surrounding that. I think for me, being asexual is why I didn't really think about it. It wasn't on my mind. It's not something that's at the forefront of my mind. So there's so much that goes into that. And I wish people would I wish they would stop and educate themselves. But sadly, these people, they have that education. They don't want to be educated. They want to remain closed-minded, angry, and ugly. And it's a very, very sad thing.
And fear. There's so much fear that goes into all of these unfortunate point of views. And so I appreciated you putting yourself out there when you did last year. It was very real, and it showed another part of the whole spectrum, and your own experience of becoming aware of a very bright, a very accomplished, a very educated person, right? This idea that, wait, people are like, wait, you didn't know? And I talk to adults all the time who have said, well, why didn't anyone tell me? If you guys thought I was leaning in those directions, why didn't you tell me, right? We make this assumption that everyone knows. It's like, well, I don't know. I just knew you were you, that sort of thing.
My best friend knew. And when I say my best friend, I know people are like, my best friend and I've been best friends for like 6 months. No, my best friend and I have been best friends for almost 25 years.
All right, that's legit.
Ages me very much right there. Yeah. And I've come out to her on 2 separate occasions, and both times she's like, yeah. And I'm like, are we not? She's like, no, I knew. And I was just like, okay. Gatekeeping. I see.
Yeah. Hello. Could I a memo, please? Memo over here. Yeah.
She absolutely loves me too much. She never put pressure on me. She never bothered me over it. I think a lot of people push people to come out. And coming out is not something for everybody that's this big, flamboyant party celebration. Some people only come out to themselves. Some people only come out to close family and friends, whatever. And so I think, but people assume it's got to look a certain way. And I'm like, it's not how that works.
Have you had to learn to be kind and compassionate to yourself as you've grown in so many ways, or does that come naturally to you?
No, that does not come naturally. I don't know who. I mean, if somebody is like, oh, I'm just so good to myself, like, what's it like to be God's favorite? What's it like to walk in the light? Tell me. Um, I'm really hard on myself. I'm really, really hard on myself. And then most recently, I'm also on top of everything else I deal with. I'm going through early onset menopause, so I began struggling with depression.
Mm.
I want to say since like probably late last year. And then it got really increasingly bad most recently. And of course, I knew exactly what to do. I was trying to do all the things. I was like, where's my coping skills?
Right.
I'm going to call my therapist. You know,
Yeah,
nobody needs a therapist more than a therapist, right?
exactly.
And so it's only gotten harder. I think being good to myself has only gotten harder. When you have children with unique needs, life is already going to present with so many extra challenges. And anybody with disabilities will tell you that the world was not built accessible. And I, I tell people all the time, I get so angry with myself because I never thought of the plight of the disabled community until I
Mm.
had disabled children.
Yeah.
And I sit with all my frustrations and all my anger dealing with this entity or that entity or this agency or that agency and wanting to just absolutely lose my mind and thinking, and this is better. Like, this is better. Like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 plus years ago. Oh my God, this is horrible. Like, so I don't know. I always think about I spend a lot of time thinking about my failures, things that I could have done better, how I could be better. For me, I am never enough. And my brain just doesn't allow me to think like that. I'm an overachiever by nature. I was a straight A student in graduate school. Like, I'm just that person.
Couldn't tell at all.
Um, yeah, and
Yeah.
I know I'm that way. And I know my thought process is, and I know when I need help and things like that. But I can't say that I've ever come to the point of being able to be kind and compassionate to myself.
Mm.
So that's still a journey I am on. And
Yeah.
until the day I die, I'm assuming that's the journey I'll be on.
Yeah.
And whether I succeed at it or not it remains to be seen.
As long as we keep that as an intention for ourselves, the world is hard enough. People are hard enough, particularly if you put yourself out there on social media. You know better than anyone. And so self compassion is an aspirational goal for us all.
Always, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You said a few, I wrote down a few things that you've written, and actually you said them and then they were written.
Okay.
Here's one, just to clarify. Um, Here's one. It just so resonated with me and will resonate with our community. I want Evan and all my kids to know that they are loved and accepted for who they are and will always be. As a parent, I chose to encourage confidence and kindness because that's what's ultimately makes the difference in the lives and hearts of kiddos like mine. And I will
I
add
did
all
say
kiddos, and I'll add all kiddos to that too. Yeah.
I did say those things.
Yes,
I say
you
a
did.
great many things.
It's so important. Like what we
Yeah.
focus on in this overly complicated world. What if we just all focus on raising people who are kind, who are accepted and feel accepted?
I don't know if you know who Scott Stewart is. Scott Creates is who he is on social media. He's a friend of mine, kind of like a distant friend, if you will. And he wrote the book My Shadow is Pink.
Mm,
When
hmm.
his son, they live in Australia. He's Australian, but his wife Mel is actually from Southern California, I believe. And so when they're coming out soon, and we're going to hang out. They're coming out,
Nice.
I think, next month. Um, and he did a video recently that I was just like, oh, I love that. And it was like a dad talking to their kid, and he was playing both roles. And the dad was like, tell me, son, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the son was like, oh, okay, like, I want to be a dancer. No, I want to be a musician. The dad's like, no. And so he's playing the kid saying all these things. And then he's like, I want to be a writer like you. Yes. And so I took that, I saw that and I was like, there it is. Um, that projection we place on our kids. You have to be like me. You
Mm-hmm.
have to fall into the same constructs that my parents raised me to fall into, or to buy into, should I say. And so those societal constructs and restraints are something that we are raised believing that we need to adhere to when these are just made up rules, you know?
Yep.
Obviously laws, not like the legal stuff. Like don't slap a cop, you guys, okay? Anybody watching this or listening to this, please
That
don't like do
doesn't go well. That will not go
that's
well.
never going to end well for you. Don't do that.
Mm-hmm. No.
But I'm talking about when we're talking about like gender identity or who essentially when with our kids, like who they want to be. You know, why can't your boy grow up to be a ballet dancer if that's what he's telling you he wants to do? It's those kinds of things that we as parents, we were raised with these wild ideals, because that was the time. There was less awareness, there was less education. These things weren't out there. And I think we're seeing a shift with a lot of parents becoming more accepting and inclusive and those things like, but we're also seeing the people who are staunchly like, absolutely not.
Right. Right.
And that's what's I think really, really hard. And so I loved
Mm-hmm.
that video he put out because I think it was just such an accurate message.
Mm-hmm. Really powerful.
Yeah.
And some of us, there are the extremes. There's the people on both ends of the spectrum, and there are for all of us being human as parents, there are times when the whole goal is to be aware and mindful that we might find ourselves unintentionally doing some of this stuff. We have the best
Yes.
intentions, and then we hear ourselves say something that maybe
Yeah.
our parent said to us. We're like, wait, what? And the thing is, you can catch yourself, and you can be like, wait. And I had a client tell me about this that they I don't know, I think it was their husband had said something to one of their kids, and right after turned to his wife and said, why did I just say that? I cannot believe I just say that. And she's like, go back in and tell them that. Apologize. Like it's not too late. Like we can make mistakes. We can turn it around.
I
Yeah.
apologize a lot to my
Yeah.
kids. I
Yeah.
mean, even last night, it sounded like they were in my room. They weren't supposed to be in my room. I was like, you guys, get out of my room. And then they kind of popped their heads up and they're like, we're not in your room. I was like, super sorry about that. It sounded like you were in there. I apologize. My bad.
My
Like,
bad. My bad.
my parents never would have said, and my parents weren't bad people by any means like that.
Mm-hmm.
They never would have said that. I don't ever recall my parents apologizing, even when they made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
There was never anything big, but even that wasn't even a big situation. I was like, dude,
Yep.
super sorry about that. Like,
Yep.
whoops.
Yep.
I'll make sure to triple check next time.
Yeah.
And so, I see my side of it. They kept going in there,
Yep.
so I assume
Totally.
that's where they were. And so, yeah. So even though for me, I'm coming from you've repeated this pattern of behavior throughout the day today.
Yeah.
So of course I know where my mind is coming from. I was still wrong. And I was like, not cool, Eeka.
Yeah.
Not cool. So I apologize.
There you
And
go.
it's a very I think it's a new thing. I'm definitely not a gentle parent. Like I see people like on social media talking about gentle parenting. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that was great. Like, and I try, and then I fail, and then I feel like shit again. And so, but I mean, I'm like, okay, just keep trying. What the
Yes.
hell?
Yes.
But I think we all have our own unique style of parenting, and I think parenting each child is very different.
Yes.
Parent shaming is just a huge problem right now. People trying to push on all parents how they should be parenting is a huge issue right now. My stance is, and I actually worked for CPS for a few years here in Southern California, where I was an investigator. I would investigate allegations of abuse and remove children when need be. So I know what actual abuse looks like. I know the penal codes surrounding that. And so what I tell parents is just love your kids. Just do your best. You're going to screw up. You're going to feel like garbage sometimes. Your kids are going to mistreat you too. Like kids by no means are innocent,
Yeah.
And I was a really good kid, but like, man, I had some family members, they were little monsters. And even as a kid, I was like, damn, you're bad. Like, but, it's one of those things where I just always tell parents, just do your best. Just do your best. And I'm going to tell you right now, your best is never going to be good enough for anybody else parenting in any other style, but just love your kids and, things will work out.
Yeah.
Things will
Love
work
your
out.
kids, parents, and be kind to love and accept your kids,
Oh, of course.
and be kind to yourself. Be kind
It's
to
sad that we
yourself.
have to say and accept. Like you think
Right.
acceptance and the unconditional side of things
No.
would tie into love when
Right.
we talk about being a parent. We shouldn't have to say unconditional love. We shouldn't have to, put that preface love with that word. We shouldn't have to say accept.
Yeah.
Those should tie into it when we're talking about
Right.
a parent's love. That's my opinion.
It's aspirational for us. One
Yeah.
day they will all go together. And we got to keep talking about acceptance, acceptance,
Yeah.
acceptance.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, Eka, it's time for the parent footprint moment question. Here we
Uh-oh.
go. You got this. You got this. Here we go. Tell us about a time that you became aware of yourself as an individual, as a parent, or even an awareness of your own parents. And that new awareness had a positive impact on your life, your kid's life, and or those you love.
We're gonna scooch that right back to my dad. I spoke about him earlier in this conversation. I know a lot of parents will tell you you'll understand your parents once you become a parent. My God, if that is not one of the most accurate things I've ever heard. So, my dad stepped into the role of dad for myself and my brother, who's only 2 years younger than me. When we were young, we were probably like 4 and 6. Um, and I never really thought of how difficult that would be. Think about it. It's very similar to fostering and adopting, right? There's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of overlap there. And I never thought, my mom had told me years later when I was adult, many years out, a few years after my dad died, quite a few years, that he always had a fear that our biological father would come back and that we would want him more.
Mm.
And he never expressed that to me when he was alive. He never, ever, ever said that to me. And it broke my heart. Um, but there are so many things I think about my dad's experience raising. I'll just talk about me. I can't even talk about my brother because I can't speak for somebody else, but raising me that I identify so closely with now. And people, it's funny because I hear a lot of people, even other women, like, how can you love somebody else's child?
Mm.
I even had somebody not long ago who was seeing some of the stuff that I deal with the behavioral issues and made the comment like, I don't want this to sound bad, but when I see it from an outside point, like these aren't even like your real kids. I was like, well, we're not going to be saying those things, like, but I
Mm-hmm.
understood where she was coming from. But she's like, well, hear me out. She goes, all this I see that you're going through. And I wonder, like, why? Because she doesn't have that heart for adoption. She doesn't
Mm-hmm.
understand that link. My
Mm-hmm.
kids feel like they're an extension of my soul. I don't know how else to express it. And
Mm-hmm.
she goes, the only reason I can think that you would do this for children that, as she said, aren't yours, which I hate when people say that, was love. You have to love these kids. I was like, I do. I love my kids to, I, I always tell them, like, if something happens, it doesn't matter if it's this life or the next. Our souls are going to find one another. We're always going
Mm.
to find each other.
Yeah.
And so, my dad taught me that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that seeing so much of the world, not understanding how, and never ever seeing that adoption is family. It's still love, that connection still exists, even though my kids didn't come from my body and we don't share a drop of blood DNA, Um, it never ever occurred to me to think like that
Mm.
because my dad,
Yeah.
I
He was,
had this person in my life
he was your dad.
who he is my dad.
He is your dad.
I always tell people he will always be my dad. And
Mm-hmm.
giving Eli and Evan his name as their middle names, I think was one of the ways to honor that very special relationship. And that's who we talk about, Papa Denny. They don't hear
Mm-hmm.
about my biological father, nothing like that. They hear about their
Mm-hmm.
Papa Denny and
Mm.
that Papa Denny's in heaven. And it's it's very it was hard to kind of start seeing it from his perspective and the things he must have felt, the fears he must have felt, like what I expressed to you he
Yeah.
had said. And now understanding those on a personal level
Yeah.
and so wishing, like, he's not here anymore, but so wishing I could go back and tell him,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
That would never ever cross my mind. You
Mm-hmm.
are my dad.
Mm.
So I'm now in that role, and
Yeah.
my dad played a pivotal part in my life. This man who had no ties to us. He had no responsibilities to us. He didn't have to be the kind of dad he was. And then he stepped up into that role and he was. And he didn't even have to say it, but just by being who he was, he taught me so many things. So
Mm.
he changed my life.
Thank you for sharing that. And when you were talking about him, your face just lit up. There was just light and smile for
I got a
everyone.
picture of him. There's a picture of him here on my
Yeah,
dresser. I have a friend
yeah,
who's a psychic medium. She's big on TikTok, and
yeah.
she's told me some stuff that I'm like, "There's no way you could have known that. There's no way you could have like." My
He's
dad
with
is
you.
here,
He's with you.
and
Yeah,
she said that. She said
yeah.
one day, she goes, "He comes. Evan feels him. He pats Evan on the head." I was like, "Shut your mouth." Evan does that to people, and I didn't
Yeah.
know where she was getting it. So she's
Wow.
like, "Your dad is here with you. He's here. He's still here." So that's comforting.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, Eeka, thank you for not only this conversation, but continuing to put yourself out there, to put your family out there in a way that expands people's minds, right? Advocates, expands. You said one of the other words of wisdom that you said is your goal is to open a few minds and a few hearts. And I think we could say that few has turned into millions. And so that is awesome.
Thank you.
So this is obvious, but tell everyone the platforms where they can find you.
We're on TikTok at the McLeod Fam. We are also over on YouTube at the McLeod Fam, and we are on Instagram at the McLeod Family.
Everyone, you already know where they are. Keep going. And for those of you who haven't gone there, go there. Become a part of the family and the mission. And that's it for today. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for your reviews. Thank you for bringing people to our community, sharing this episode with everyone you know will benefit. Leave you with one last word of wisdom from Eeka. Stay educated and stay kind.
Thank you.
You know what I'm going to ask you to do? That is to be the person you want your child to become. Do your best. It's all you can do. And ask yourself the guiding question I ask myself each day. What footprint do you want to leave? This has been a Peters and Rossi production. Parent Footprint with Dr. Dan is produced by Laura Rossi. Our engineer is Phil Rossi. Theme music is Strummer Man, composed and performed by Pro Tunes. Artwork is by Garrett Ross. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Parent Footprint Podcast and on Twitter at Dr. Dan Peters. For more information, go to exactlyrightmedia.com.